Excellent. Alrighty, everyone. Appreciate your patience. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but it's actually a great lesson with the topic today and what you can expect when working with the appraisal district. You have to learn to pivot. So you will be thrown some curveballs, to say the least. So really appreciate everyone joining. Just to make sure that everyone can hear us, can someone give us a thumbs up or say I can hear you in the comments, just so we know that we're going live now. So we got Brooklyn behind the scenes helping us here, so she can let us know if we get anyone that can hear us, just so we don't dive into it too quickly here. Looks like we are live. So again, if anyone can hear us, will you just give us a thumbs up or say yes in the comment section, because we are experiencing technical difficulties this morning. There we go. Awesome. That was Jeanette or Janet. Really appreciate it. So this is going to be recorded, so if anyone jumps on late or if you want a recording of this, we can send it to you. And we also recorded this webinar that we did last year as well. And so the information is still very pertinent, and obviously this time of year is a little nerve-wracking, a little exciting to say the least. You know, the appraisal districts usually aggressively raise property taxes every year. And we believe that it is your legal right and obligation to protest your property taxes. And there are a number of different ways you can do that. You can do it by yourself, which is the premise of this webinar today, or you can hire a company to do it. So wanted to introduce my colleagues here. This is Ewan Choate, and Ewan covers Williamson County and Travis County for us. And then this is Daniel Tovar, and he covers Hayes County, Caldwell County, and Bastrop County. So our company is Land Sale Texas, and we specialize in buying and selling land and also land brokerage. And the whole goal for this webinar, this is just merely for educational purposes only. You know, we have seen so many different circumstances and situations where people just feel so overwhelmed when they go to protest their property taxes. They really feel like they're going into it blind. They don't understand how the process works. So we just wanted to do this webinar. We do this every year around this time of year because we just want to help fellow landowners and property owners so they can navigate this process, because it can be very overwhelming at times. A couple quick housekeeping things here. We are not CPAs, we are not attorneys, we're not financial advisors. Again, this is just merely for educational purposes. Our company, Land Sale Texas, as I mentioned, we specialize in buying and selling land in the greater Austin area as well as land brokerage. So wanted to dive into it a little bit. Daniel actually has extensive experience. He used to work for 2 different appraisal districts for over 11 years. So Daniel understands this like the back of his hand. So we like to bring him on board whenever we do these webinars. And Ewan also has some personal knowledge with this as well. He recently just bought a house and some land, and so he's navigating that process of understanding how to protest his property taxes. So we're right in the same seat as y'all, whomever's watching. You know, we are landowners ourselves. We protest our property taxes every year. And for landowners that we are working with, we also will help them protest their property taxes if we're in the process of buying their property. So again, this is being recorded. If you want to reach out to us afterwards for the recording, you can email us at landteam@landsaletx.com. Sale is spelled S-A-L-E, not S-E-L-L. So I'll get started here, and like I said, so we're going to switch a little bit from Daniel to Ewan. Ewan is currently navigating this process, and we are as well with some of our properties. So Daniel, 'tis the season of property protest.
Yes.
So what, let's say, so someone received their notices. How do they go about that? What is the deadline that they have to submit their protest? Walk us through that process, if you would, please.
Yeah, so most folks, I'm sure y'all have received y'all's notices. I know myself personally, I live in Hayes County, and I've received my notice. We have other properties in Bastrop County. Those notices have gone out. Caldwell County has gone out. I'm not sure if Williamson or Travis, have y'all received y'all's yet. The reason I bring this up is because typically the state has a deadline of May 15th to get your protests in. However, if your appraisal district gets the notices out later, they may extend that deadline. So one of the first things you want to do when you receive your notice is check the top. Usually it's at the top, and it'll tell you what the deadline is. And that's going to basically give you your, hey, I need to get this in between by this deadline. That's it. If it is late, you won't have a chance to protest unless it was some extreme circumstance, like maybe you were, on your deathbed at the hospital, got into a severe accident, things like that. They would consider that. You'd have to write a letter to the appraisal review board to see if they would hear your hearing or not. So I just want to bring that up because that is one option if you do miss your hearing. If you just missed it because life happened, or something that wasn't very important, they're not gonna hear your case. So that's something to be important, very important to check your deadline. So once you get that, the next thing you want to see is check your exemptions. So if you live in your home and your property and that is your main homestead, you want to make sure that your exemptions are in place. Some of the exemptions that you can receive are generally, for most people, you have your homestead exemption. If that's your main residence and your driver's license matches that address, you can apply for your homestead. If you've lived in your property for longer than a couple of years, you can actually go in and retroactively get your homestead if you realize that you don't have that. So that's one thing that can save you some money real quick, just checking to make sure your exemptions are in place. Your over 65 exemption, if you are older than 65, you're qualified for a freeze. They freeze your school and county taxes, so they'll establish a ceiling on that. And you can go in, as the date of 65, when your birthday is, you can go and apply for that.
And that's a tremendous savings, and I imagine a lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah, sometimes you forget, and you may just, you go on with life and you don't think, oh, well, I got my homestead, that's it. You do qualify for over 65 when you hit that age threshold. Another thing you can get is a disability. If you are on disability, you need to get doctor's notes, you can apply for that. That also gives you some tax break benefits. If you're a disabled veteran, there are different tiers for based on your rating of disability. You can receive, a full what's called a full homestead disabled veteran homestead, and that would actually qualify you from paying any property taxes. So if you're a 100% disabled veteran, if you get your letter, from the government stating that you are 100% disabled, you take that in, fill out your paperwork, and you can be 100% exempt from taxes.
Are those all retroactive?
So the homestead goes back 2 years. On the other ones, it may vary. I don't know off the top of my head if they are retroactive, but I know anything regarding a homestead and you're over 65, they go retroactively for a certain amount of years. 2 years, I believe, is the length of that. And so if you are going in, make sure when you fill out that homestead form, if you are going retroactively, make sure the year that you apply for is the retroactive year, not the current year, because then it would just start that year going forward. So just real quick, just some exemption stuff.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to touch on too, Daniel mentioned that if you missed your window to fill out the application to protest your property taxes, good luck trying to get them to say, hey, actually, we'll give you a pass here, and we'll accept that. Of course, there are some extenuating circumstances, but we actually had this happen last year for one of the properties that we were trying to protest. We did not check the mail, and they're going to send a letter in the mail. It's not a certified letter, it's just a regular piece of mail via snail mail through the post office to your address on file for the mailing address. So we always recommend it. Check your mailbox once a week. We literally will call in as well, because their philosophy is if you miss the letter, it doesn't matter what happened, generally speaking, that's your responsibility. And if you missed your window, tough luck. So, for all of the properties that we're managing, we always make sure that we have an assistant that will help us call into the appraisal districts. We check their website, because if they have updated their 2023 values or whatever year it is, then they should have sent the letter as well. So as Daniel said, if you miss your window, tough luck. For the most part. It's going to be challenging.
Yeah, and just to get a little bit more detail on that situation, we were even calling, and I talked to somebody at the appraisal district saying, hey, this is your date for the hearing for my other properties, and I asked about one particular property, and they said, well, there's no hearing for that. So we were checking the mail. I guess it got delayed or whatever the case may be, a mix up in the mail. But when we get the notice, it was already past our deadline, and I had someone tell me from the appraisal district that it wasn't scheduled yet, but it doesn't matter, at that point, what they said. So just be very proactive on making sure that your end is covered, on making sure you know what these dates and times are, because they're not going to care if you miss it, and that's just the bottom line, unfortunately.
Can you reach out and be proactive and get the dates prior to the notice? How do you avoid that situation?
You can, but in this situation, they told me there was nothing scheduled when there was something clearly scheduled, and it's just too bad. Oh, well, tough luck, So just be very proactive on that and making sure you get your dates and times locked in.
And we can't emphasize that enough, folks. And sometimes some of these government officials that work for the appraisal districts, sometimes there is hostility, and it's unfortunate, but we always lead with looking at it through the lens of grace and patience, and they're just trying to do their job. Yeah, maybe they don't do it as effectively. I mean, when Daniel worked there, he truly had the best interest of landowners at heart as well, and so Daniel excelled at his job. Unfortunately, not all folks at the appraisal districts are like that, but view it through a lens of grace, but still stand firm and exercise your right to demand information. And even if you have to call them every single day, be aggressive. I mean, this is your livelihood at stake with your property, right? It's usually the single largest investment decision you can make is buying or selling land or a home, for example, or a commercial property. So exercise your right. Again, I think it is your legal duty and obligation to protest your property taxes. So Ewan, you just purchased some property, and how did you receive? Well, first off, if you're working with an agent, as mentioned, we do brokerage as well. But I believe it is the agent's responsibility, especially if it's a home, your primary residence, to talk to you about the homestead exemption and how you can apply for it. So what was that process like when working with your agent? And because unfortunately not all agents or brokers will bring that up, but the good ones do. And you worked with the number one broker in her applicable county, and she was a rock star and did a great job for you. But walk us through that process, and how did you receive your notice? When did you receive your notice?
I had a little bit of a cheat code knowing Daniel, so I was anticipating that. But my agent sent us a letter in the mail and some introductory language, and I don't think that's common. Like I said, I'm a little bit atypical, so I was anticipating it. I will say I still waited till my deadline to turn in my papers. If you miss your deadline with the exemptions, can you? Is that different?
You can still file.
Yeah.
So I know typically they'll have a certain date on there. They want to get these exemptions in. The reason they have the date is because they want to have your exemptions as much as they can in place. So when you get your notice, it reflects what you've applied for. So if you miss the deadline, like I mentioned, you can go back retroactively for your homestead. You can just go in after the date and get it on. But the main premise of the deadline is to make sure everybody's exemptions are in place, so when you get your notice, you see what you've applied for.
Is there any record? Because my experience with dropping off my exemption papers was walking to the county appraisal district, and they said, "We got it."
Yeah. So you can do that. I always request them to stamp it received with the date that you turned it in and get a copy of that, just so there's no confusion as to, hey, well, I brought this in here, but someone lost my application. So that can happen.
And at that point, it's your word against theirs. Who's going to win?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a really good question. Make sure it's stamped approval, receipted. Absolutely. So Daniel, a lot of us are getting our notices for one of our properties in San Marcos, substantial increase on price. And so, how does the appraisal district come up with these prices? Because sometimes, and in their defense, it's probably laborious and monotonous labor doing it every year. But sometimes these prices are just absolutely astronomical, and it defies logic in many cases. And I'm sure most of the folks watching will agree with that statement. How do they come up with these prices?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Kacey. Most folks think, okay, well, my prices went up so much, but this current climate that we're in with interest rates going up and everything, I know everybody's heard chatter of, well, the markets are kind of slowing down and things like that. Why is my value still up so high? Well, the appraisal district uses the prior year sales to generate this year's value. So as everybody knows, last year was the peak of the market that we've seen, the past couple of years. So the reflection of that is being seen this year on these current values, because this is all from last year. So you got to keep in mind, even though some of the current state of the market is not going to affect this year's taxable value for your property, because it's all based off of last year's. And that's just through the tax code. That's the way the property tax code is set up through the state of Texas. That's how they wish the appraisal district to value their properties, and that's what they have to follow. So it is using prior year sales.
Okay, prior year. So if, and we encourage you to, if you're going to protest your property taxes yourself, which we'll talk about here in a second, you want to try to find comparable sales. Now, what's tricky about Texas is a non-disclosure state. So it can be challenging to find comparable sales, especially for land. Land can be very tricky to find comparable sales. But if you know someone who's a licensed agent or broker, maybe they'll do you a favor and pull comps from the MLS, for example. But even then, it still can be tricky. But you want to go in with as much ammo as possible. Let's say it's a home and you have your foundation is cracked, for example. You can take pictures of that as well. You want as much evidence as possible. But again, as Daniel said, regarding comparable sales, you can't go in and say, well, this house down the street sold this year for X amount of money, because again, they're basing everything off of 2022 values. Now, the first half of 2022, white hot market, and then talk about whiplash. My goodness, the second half of 2022, the market started to experience a fairly significant correction. So if you can find comparable sales towards the latter part of last year, that might be in your benefit. So let's say someone gets their property tax notification. And by the way, folks, if you have questions, I didn't mention this in the beginning, I don't believe. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them along the way. You don't have to wait till the end. So, we can see the comments that are coming in. And Shannon, thank you. I'm glad that you can hear us now. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask us along the way, and we'll get to them as quickly as possible. So we want to protest our property taxes. How do you do it? DIY, right? Do it yourself. Yeah. Or there's a plethora of companies out there will do it. And how their business model usually works, folks, is, and they've started to switch. Now they're starting to charge you money whether they're successful or not, which I disagree with. But there are still some companies that adhere to the old business model of we only get paid if we're effective for you. And usually they charge about a 25 to 30% premium, meaning if they saved you, for easy numbers, $10,000 on property taxes, they would get anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 of that $10,000 that they saved you. So that's typically how the business model used to work, but I think some companies have switched to charging you whether they're successful or not, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. So do your homework. But from Daniel's experience, again, Daniel has 11 years experience working on the other side of the table, so to speak. Are those companies worth their salt? Is it better to do it yourself?
So
let's walk through that process.
To be quite frank with you, it's just going to be like anything else. You need to research the company you're working with. You need to make sure that they're doing quality work. Maybe ask for some examples of cases that they've put together to see what they're showing. Some companies are better than others. Some will show up, and whether it be the lack of information that the property owner provided to them or the lack of information that they have, they just show up and basically are a body in a chair. Hey, here's the property. Here's what the property owner's telling me. They may present evidence if you gave them the evidence to present. In that case, we'll review it and make adjustments accordingly. But basically, that's really the extent of it. They just analyze the property. They see what our evidence is, and if they don't have evidence to contradict what we're showing them, they're kind of in a hard spot to represent you. So it varies through each company. So that's just review and see what the knowledge of the company is before you go with them.
So yeah, good advice. Do your homework. Whether you do it yourself or you utilize a company that specializes in it, do your homework. Interview them, right? Mm-hmm. Again, this is your livelihood. Single most important financial decision you'll probably make in your lifetime. It's important that you educate yourself. So with these companies, Daniel, from your experience, especially for residential properties, I would imagine, is it kind of just churn and burn? It's a numbers game for them, and they know that they're not going to be successful. How much effort do they put into it? Because if you have a $5 million commercial property, it might make sense at that point to potentially hire one of these companies or an attorney that really specializes in it. But for residential homes, from your experience, is it better to do it yourself?
I would say the answer to that would be to do it yourself, because you're going to know your home better than anybody else. So to represent yourself and knowing the condition and the inner workings of your home, what's wrong with it, what's not, the person you hire to represent you is only going to know what you tell them. So if you forget to tell them something, or maybe you have a certain situation in your house where you have to turn a few levers or something to get the water to work in some room, and you forget to mention that to them, they're not going to know that right off the bat to bring that up to help you fight your property taxes. So in my opinion, it's always best for you to represent yourself, just because you know your home better than anybody else. Also, chances are you're going to know your area better than them as well, because you got to keep in mind, what's going on your street or in your area versus someone who lives in a different area and they don't, travel that road every day. So you're going to know what's going on. You're going to know, you've seen that property when it rains, if there's flood issues, if there's drainage issues, you've seen that property more so than anybody else has. So that's one of the benefits of representing yourself as well.
Okay. And I've personally used one of these companies for a residential home I used to own, and one of the companies, one year they were effective and they were successful, and then I just paid them 30% of what they saved me, and then other years they weren't successful. And knowing what I know now, and just after getting to know Daniel these last few years and understanding his knowledge and the process, as Daniel mentioned, I think for a residential home, and even in some cases for land, you're probably better off doing it yourself if you want to take the time to educate yourself. And it is really interesting to go through the process. It's a fascinating experience in human nature at times when you see both sides of the aisle, so to speak. But nonetheless, it's good to educate yourself on this topic. So Daniel, what are the first steps? And I believe you said that you did fill out the application. Are you
That's
gonna,
right, yeah.
you're going to protest your property taxes?
Not for my
Oh,
homestead.
for your homestead. For your homestead. Now
I
your
do
home
have
is
a question about that.
yeah, far away.
If someone bought a newer home at a high point in the market and there's a disparity between the valuation and maybe what you paid, is there a time that you don't want to protest? Can you be punished somehow?
So 9 times out of 10, whenever the appraisal district is coming up with these values in mass, and Alan, I see your comment. I'll get to you here in a second after I answer Ewan's question, and we'll address yours. Whenever you're looking at the total values, they're playing with missing pieces. So basically, they're doing a math formula, missing numbers, because Texas is a non-disclosure state. So they don't know what every single cell is. So they're getting it based off of surveys they send out. Maybe there's some deeds that they've done research on that disclose a sales price. But other than that, they're just dealing with the numbers that they have. So they could be missing a lot of information. So to your point, if you get your tax notice and you purchased your house for $100,000 and they're saying that it's worth, let's say it's worth $50,000. Well, obviously you're not going to go protest that because they got a lower value.
Sure.
However, on the flip side, if you purchased your house for $500,000 and they have it valued at $600,000, you may want to go to the appraisal review board to see if you can get something done. I can tell you right now, if it's a new sale and you're talking to somebody informally, chances are they're not going to adjust that sale. And the reason being is because all these data points are used in what's called a ratio study, and they have to be between 95 and 105% of value. So if the appraisal district adjusts these values on a new sale and it skews their numbers, they could fail their state study, and that could end up resulting in a loss of funding for schools and things like that. So that's why it's kind of hard when you have a new sale. They typically will send you into the appraisal review board, because the appraisal review board is actually separate than the appraisal district. They can make their own decisions based off of hearing. They're just, your peers. They live in the county. They're volunteers. They get elected by different school officials to be put in these positions to hear your cases. Now they act based upon the evidence presented. So they're not held to the standards like the appraisal district is. So chances are, if you have a new sale or you have something that's very extremely different than what the appraisal district is telling you, I'll go all the way to the appraisal review board. And we'll get into those steps later on, the different steps you can take. I wanted to get to Alan's question. He said, why does the tax assessor want you to limit to comps from the neighborhood boundaries based on the GIS when you are on a boundary line of a neighborhood?
That's a good question, Alan.
Yeah, so the reason being is whenever you're valuing a neighborhood, every piece of property is analyzed as a contiguous neighborhood. That's basically saying it's uniform. You're going to place all these same standards on this neighborhood. So you have to have an element of equity there. You can't just say, okay, this lot's 50,000, this lot's 80,000, they're the same size. That doesn't work. There has to be uniformity in that neighborhood. So if you're in a neighborhood and they designate your lot in a neighborhood, it's going to be valued as whatever that neighborhood table is on. There's basically every piece of property is on a land table. So if you have a rural piece of property in a certain school district or a certain area, that may be valued differently than a piece of property across town, in a neighborhood. All these are valued based off of the equity in that particular neighborhood on sales, so they have to have the uniformity. So Alan, I don't know if your property, of what you're referencing, is it on the other side of the neighborhood or in that neighborhood? I will go into details on some of the things we need to request to check these things from the appraisal district to see how they're valuing your property here a little bit later on in the discussion. But Alan, if you have a follow-up question, I'd be happy to answer that.
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Alan. So I want to touch on something before we go to the next point. So you mentioned, obviously, if they have it appraised for, $500,000 and you paid $600,000, then you probably don't want to bring that up.
Yeah.
But let's say it's reversed. Let's say they have it appraised at $600,000 and you have proof that you paid $500,000 in the year of the assessed value. So let's say you bought it in 2022 for $500,000 and they're assessing it at $600,000 this year. Absolutely show your HUD statement, your closing statement, and say, hey, look, I have verification. I paid $500,000 for this property, but you're valuing it 20% higher at $600,000. Now, you want to be careful with that because we had this happen. In that situation, I would definitely render your HUD statement to show proof that you paid $500,000 for it. But if you're trying to reduce your property taxes, and they're going to flat out ask you, what did you, if you recently paid or purchased a property, they're going to flat out ask you directly, what did you pay for that property? Now remember, non-disclosure state, you can exercise your right to not disclose that, and we did in one of our property protests. And then they said, well, it must have been a distress sale, or it wasn't an arm's length transaction, which means neither the buyer or seller has undue influence over one another. And it was an absolutely arm's length transaction. It wasn't distressed, but we didn't feel comfortable disclosing the sales price. But you kind of put yourself in between a rock and a hard spot, because then they immediately default to thinking, well, you don't want to tell us what you paid for it because we know you paid a lot of money for it.
And real quick, let me caveat that question. Or that statement. When you purchase something that's it's an off-market sale, that's not going to be considered an arm's length transaction, because it's not open to the fair market.
Okay.
So that's
thank you for correcting me.
That changes it. So
in their eyes, that is not considered an arm's length transaction, even if there was no distress. No. Interesting. Okay.
So when you're looking at these ratio studies that I mentioned earlier, they need to have MLS sales, because even though the appraisal district doesn't get the sales, the state will. The state will get that information, and so that's what they're going to compare it to. Now, if it's off market, distressed, foreclosures, things like that, those are non-arm's length transactions. So if you purchase your property from your neighbor off market, that's not going to be really considered in their ratio study. Those sales will get thrown out because it was a non-arm's length transaction. It wasn't exposed to the open market. Not everybody had a chance to make an offer on it.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's a little bit of a change.
And as Daniel said, by law, appraisal districts are not allowed to get MLS access. However, they do countless times, and recently Austin Board of Realtors had to send a cease and desist letter to, I think it was Hayes County, because they caught Hayes County looking at MLS records. But as Daniel said, the county can still look in the county clerk records. If you get a mortgage on a property, well, that mortgage company will file a record of that, because they want to protect their interests as the first lien holder. And so you can deduce roughly what someone paid for it by looking at that. So there are still ways. The appraisal district, they know what they're doing, so they're aggressive at finding these values. So, Daniel, let's say someone wants to protest themselves. What are the first steps? What do they need to do?
Okay, so real quick before we get to this, I think we had two comments come in here. One from Alba.
Yeah, let's see.
I believe her question was, if she purchased her property 2 years ago, would taking in the HUD statement in this year be effective at all? The answer is unfortunately no. Like I said, the appraisal district is looking at the value of the prior year sales. They stop at the prior year, so it'd be just whatever sales took place in 2022. That's what they're using. They're not going to use 2021 sales. Sometimes I've seen in smaller CADs, like I've worked in before, where there's not enough sales in those 2 years. They do have a clause in the property tax code that extends the range of time frame that they can use. But typically in the regions that we work, they have plenty sales to use the last current year. So unfortunately, Alba, that wouldn't work. We have a couple.
Yeah.
Charles before Alba.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Let's see here. And Alba, thank you for the question. I know Alba. It's good to see you, Alba. I hope you're well. So, all right. So Charles says, so if my property is 4 years old and it's the smallest floor plan of all the floor plans of the other homes in my neighborhood, then there's not really going to be. Where are we at? That just moved on me. There's not really going to be any others that are cheaper. So what houses do I compare to? Oh, that's a good question.
So yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. So I've had a lot of folks come in here and say, well, I have the highest price per square foot whenever people were protesting. I have the smallest house, but I have the highest price per square foot. You are going to have the highest price per square foot because your house is smaller in regards to what you're comparing to. But you can't get lost in that, because you have to look at your total overall value. So Charles, what I would suggest you want to be doing is looking at equity as far as what they have the other houses around you classed as. You mentioned you have a smaller home. Well, there's different classifications for each homes and they range depending on what county you have. They have different lingos and different classifications. But if you're saying your house is the smallest, maybe, I don't know the characteristics, but I'm just using the example. Maybe it's got less design than, you know, the rest of the houses on your street. Let's just use, for example, you have a rectangle and everybody else has all these houses with the design floor plan with a bunch of ins and outs and different roof lines and things like that. That would, to me, and the size difference, that would tell me that those houses are classed differently than your house, or they should be. So that's something you should be checking for as well. I don't know how deep y'all want to go into it right now, if you want to address questions, or I can get to what we need to request.
Yeah, there are a couple other questions, right, Brooklyn?
Mm-hmm.
What do we have here? I'll let you run the mouse.
Yeah, George says if you bring pictures and reparations needed and numerous damages, could that potentially be bait for the code department to swarm? Does that information stay on file, which the code department could have access to?
You know, in all the years that I've worked at the appraisal district, I've never had anybody from the code department come in our office for anything. Basically, what our values are used for are strictly for property taxes. Like, if you take your appraisal and take it to a bank and say, oh, well, the appraisal district says my property is worth this, that's not gonna work. It's, our appraisals are strictly for property taxes only. So, to answer your question, I don't believe so. I mean, bigger CADs may work differently and they may have more communication. I know as far as Comal and Wilson County, where I've worked in, we didn't really share that information. The only thing that we got from the county would be like building permits, because they would want to notify us, hey, there's new construction here. But as far as like those pictures that you take in and get scanned on your file, those are supposed to be confidential to you and the appraisal district. Are not supposed to share those. So, I mean, even when you go on the back end that I've seen, whenever you're working on the programs itself, there's like a file where you have all your images that you provided to me, and it's on the side it says it's confidential. So there is systems in place whenever you put that. I know you have access to the public computers in some CADs. You can go in and look up information. However, there's no images displayed on that database. If there are images, it may just be like the front picture of your house or something like that. But it's not the information that you would submit to us stating, oh, I have all this interior damage and my bids to get this cost to cure, things like that. All that should be confidential, because that's just, again, for property tax purposes.
Yeah.
So.
That was a good question, and Charles, I mean, obviously, you know, exercise caution if you think that it could come back to bite you potentially, then, you know, you'll have to make that judgment call. But if it's anything on the interior of the home, I can't imagine, and of course, please do your own homework, but I can't imagine that would be a code violation, because code officers just drive around and look at the physical exterior of the property. So it probably wouldn't be a code violation if it was interior, but again, please do your homework on that. Brooklyn, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, so Marla asking, we might be kind of jumping into this, is so to be ready to protest a home and land owned for several years, not a homestead, you must have these parts: 1, photos of condition, etc., 2, sales comps, which individuals have no access to, question mark.
Yeah, so again, it is challenging in Texas because it's a non-disclosure state, but and with land, it's even more challenging. And we even face that challenge when we're buying land and selling land, right? I mean, Ewan, we just came from a meeting with a landowner, actually, and he asked us if there were comps for a property of his nature, and there really aren't. There is zero. Yeah, on the MLS, LoopNet, Craigsy, I mean, all the commercial listing websites. So it is challenging for us too, so we feel your pain. I think the best route to go is you can look in county clerk records, and you can look at purchases that were made, you know, for adjacent properties in your neighborhood, and you can see if there's a mortgage on the property. And a standard conventional mortgage is 20% down, and so you can just work backwards and do the math and, you know, reverse engineer it, so to speak, and you can roughly find out what they paid for the property. Obviously, if it's an FHA loan, they probably put 3.5% to 5% down. So you can reverse engineer it that way, but it is a challenge. That's why I recommend, like I said, if you have an agent that's a friend or a broker that has access to the MLS, but again, the MLS isn't always going to be the best indicator. But one thing you can do, and we will get into this, is you can request the comps that the appraisal district is using as well.
Yes, along with other additional information that I'm going to go over. Yeah, you can provide your own photographs and things, but also on the back end, you need to make sure that they're appraising your property fairly and equally and to the current condition. So I'm going to go ahead and let you know about some of the things you can request from the appraisal district here a little bit further in the conversation.
Last question before we dive in. How do you deal with new neighborhoods where the developer is still selling new homes? Can they use the sales price for those homes even if they're newer?
Yes. So if you're, like, let's just say, for example, if you want to get to more specific and give me more details, I'll be more than happy to rephrase my answer. But if, let's say the neighborhood's 2 years old, right? So that means last year they had sales from what they're using. Well, I'll use it 3 years because 2 years is too short. So 3 years, let's say the neighborhood's 3 years old, and for the last 2 years you have sales, right? And then, you know, obviously maybe you bought your home in year one, and then you have obviously the next year the market went up, let's say, and more folks are buying for this higher price. Well, that's going to be reflected on your property as well. There is situations where you have depreciation. So if you had something happen, I know it's very rare that something happens when your home is brand new like this, but if, let's just say that time you had a pipe bust, I think Ewan ran into some similar, just things out of the ordinary happen. You had a pipe bust, it did damage to your drywall, and you know your home's basically brand new, but you have this issue. Document that, take that in. But unfortunately, you know, a typical home that's, you know, only 2 years old really isn't going to have any signs of depreciation, so you don't really have a recourse to get any kind of, you know, depreciation reduction on that property, unfortunately, just because it's newer, and that basically that is what that market is in your neighborhood. And unfortunately, I know folks don't like to look at it like this, but another thing to take in consideration, if your house is newer like that, would you really sell it for that price that the appraisal district has it marked at? It's just something to ask yourself as well, because that's the way they're going to view it. They're not viewing it as, oh, well, I want to live here forever and I never want to sell. They have to view it as market value, which means would this property sell for this much or more? So.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, great question. Really appreciate that. So I have a couple questions for you, Daniel, but you and I know you have some questions as well. Do you want to dive into those as a new landowner?
Yeah.
Or do you want to reserve those for a little bit later?
No, I mean, you're answering a lot as we go along.
Yeah.
But I was curious if you made improvements or added structures that increased the value of your home, would that be something that would affect the appraisal? So, and is it across the board? Is it a storage shed to a little bedroom?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ewan. So what happens is the appraisal district values properties as they are as of January 1st. So this is actually a good, I'm going to add some more information into that question. Yeah, so let's say you buy your lot in, I want to say November of 2022. Okay, and then you start construction in January 10th. Well, for that year of 2023, you're going to be valued as just a lot because your house construction did not start until after January 1st. So that's something to keep in mind. The same thing, the caveat off of that is if your house was 50% done on January 1st, then that's what you should be assessed at. You shouldn't be assessed at 100% complete home. You can get some of that information while working with your builder, stating he'll state a percent complete or what they had done complete on the house at that point in time. Get a document from him just stating that, take that in if they have it, if there's any inconsistency with what percent they're saying. So that's one thing. Now to get to the new buildings and everything. So if you, again, if you add these buildings, you know, in November of 2022, whatever it is, a storage building, a metal building, a pool, things like that, that would be reflected off 2023. Now you mentioned the different classifications. I had kind of touched on this earlier with homes. Different outbuildings have different classifications as well. You know, a Morgan storage shed that you can buy at Home Depot or something like that is not going to be valued the same as a storage shed you built on a concrete slab with, you know, timber and stuff at your house. That's going to be a different quality build.
Sure.
The value is going to reflect that. The same thing with a metal building. If you have a pre-engineered metal building versus a metal building you buy with those off the side of the road, you know, sometimes you see where they sell just the steel pipe frame, you know, like little sheds, carports. There's going to be a difference in value on those as well. So you just want to make sure that you're keeping in line with what that is.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but that's a great question. And again, so I will say, if the appraisal district, if you have something on your house, like I built this shed in 2023. My value didn't go up and they're not accounting for that. Don't be surprised if they account for it later on. Now, at the same time, you don't want to be too sneaky. You want to be upfront with the appraisal district because they have a clause in there. They can go back 5 years and assess you. So like I've had an example where this guy had built a house and for whatever reason we missed it. And it was for like, I think 3 years. he wouldn't been taxed. Well, he was telling all his neighbors that he don't pay taxes and this and that. So obviously
Came
the
back to
neighbors
bite him.
the neighbors came in and said, hey, well, why isn't he paying any taxes? So then
Oh,
the appraisal district went and measured the house and then retroactively charged him 3 years back because that's when the house was built 3 years ago. So and then he had to pay that tax bill that year.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it's so.
In that year. So
Oh,
all
yeah.
the retroactive years, but paid in that year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then so it can vary. I would always just say communicate with them if they miss something. If it's a shed or something like that, chances are they won't go back retroactively. But if it's a home or something of substantial value, please be upfront with them and let them know, hey, this is here. Y'all didn't count it. You may want to address that.
So you don't get a nasty
Yeah,
surprise down the road. Yeah.
exactly.
And of course, folks, if you change something on the interior of your home, correct me if I'm wrong, but you do not have to let them into your home.
Correct.
But that is a judgment. I'm not saying that you don't disclose that by any stretch of the imagination, but that is a judgment call on your end. But if it is external, of course, they're going to see it in satellite images, and they have the legal right to come onto your property, especially if it's land. So you can't say, I'm exercising my landowner rights and you can't come on my property because I have a gun or something stupid. They have every legal right to come onto your property. They just can't come inside your home. So
No, we'll say the same situation. If I was appraising and someone was telling me, I'm not going to come out here, you can't be here, that's fine. I'm going to estimate from the road, and I'm probably going to estimate really high. And it's probably going to
the
be
old estimate from the road, 20% premium.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to do what you have to do.
Yeah.
Because
That
ultimately,
looks like 20% extra right there. Yeah.
because ultimately they want to get their information, so they're going to
course.
send you a notice with $1 million house and you have $500,000 house. Well, you're going to gladly invite them out to go get it corrected, but those are some of the things you're going to have to deal with. Pick your battle, basically.
Again, as we said earlier,
do what you wanna do.
they're human beings. Treat them with respect, be fair, and expect the same in return. And if you think that they're not giving you a fair shot, you have every right to stand up for yourself. And again, we think you should every year. We have two questions.
Yeah,
Let's address George. So George said, can you request tax abatement for open or unclosed permits? That's interesting. I don't think we've
George,
got that question before.
I don't know if you can. To be completely honest with you, I have never dealt with that because the appraisal district doesn't deal with permits. We get that from the county, and basically the county would send us this list of every person who's applied for a permit for new construction or whatever they were going to build, and that just let us know, hey, we need to go check this property out because they built something here. But as far as what your request is, I'm not sure. I know a lot of information can be obtained through public information requests. Most local entities, and I'm going to touch on the public information requests a little bit later on, but most public entities will have to answer to these public information requests, whether it be with the information you requested or an answer stating that they in fact cannot provide what you're looking for. So that may be an avenue you want to try to go through if you're looking for that particular information, but unfortunately I don't have a clear answer for you.
And one caveat is, even though if it's written in the state code, every appraisal district, every municipality, every county interprets the state code through their own lens.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah.
That's
So
interesting.
George, honestly, the best thing to do would be to contact your local appraisal district, I think, in that situation, because that is we've never had that question before. It's a phenomenal question, but every appraisal district, they interpret the code very differently. So they interpret the law and act accordingly. So good question though. Tanya just asked, this is a great question, Tanya. What if a newly constructed wastewater treatment facility is built adjacent to your property? Would this have a negative impact to the value of your property? That's a good question, because if I'm buying a property that's next to a wastewater treatment facility, absolutely it negatively impacts the value. But Daniel, from the lens of an appraisal district, how does that work? Do you think they would give
so
that a discount?
there are certain adjustments that you can get based off of different things, whether it be like drainage, floodplain. There's on homes, there's an economic factor you can put on there. So there are varieties of adjustments to be made. Now, the other question you'd ask, this can happen a few ways, right? So if you've owned the land, and I think you're saying you've owned it for a while, if you own the land and then they newly just start building this, like you're kind of referencing here, then that's a change. Hey, when I purchased this property, there was not this wastewater treatment right next to me. I paid this much money because I saw an investment and I thought that this property was going to increase in value. However, now with this new current activity right next door makes my property less desirable. So that's the.
You could mount a good argument.
Yeah, that'd be the
situation.
argument. Yes. Yeah, that'd be a great argument to have. Now, on the flip side of that, let's say they had this land valued at $30,000 for the lot, right? And they were building this wastewater facility treatment plant, and then in the course of that, you already knew that construction was happening, and you still paid $50,000 for that lot, meaning you paid more than what they had it appraised at, and then now you're gonna go try to say, well, this is here, that was already there. So it's kind of like you've already bought that property knowing that that was next door to your property, it's not assuming that there's may or may not happen, it was already happening there. So it's kind of like, okay, well, you still bought the property though, even though you knew that was happening next door. So it's not as strong of an argument as kind of like I think what you have here, what you're referencing, that they started after you've already owned the property. You didn't anticipate that to happen, so.
Okay, yeah, great question, Tanya. So Daniel, and y'all, we had this scheduled for about an hour because of the technical difficulties up front. We might go over a little bit. If you have to jump off to get back to a prior commitment that you have, feel free to reach out to us afterwards. We'll send you this recording in an email. So Daniel, someone wants to, let's kind of go quickly through this, but someone wants to protest, do it yourself. What are the first steps they need to do? We talked about filling out the application.
Yes.
Now, you can do this online or you can just drop it off to the appraisal district, but if you're sending it in mail, do certified mail. We cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure it is certified mail, so they have to stamp approval. We received the application. So walk us through the process, Daniel. What does that look like?
So, real quickly, what you want to do is you're obviously going to want to request what's called a appraisal card. So this is going to have all the details. And if they try to act like, well, okay, just an appraisal card, and they try to give you just a printout, no, you want the detailed appraisal card. It's going to have a whole bunch of numbers on there. It's going to have percentages. It's going to have the classification of your home. This is going to tell you what percent they are valuing your home as far as like if there's any depreciation. I think I'll use an example on one of the houses that we protested that we own. They had it at 100% good, meaning brand new. The house was built in 1994. That's not accurate. So that's real quick. I pointed that out to them. Hey, y'all have this house valued as a brand new house. The same thing on that same card, you'll be able to check your classification of your home to see what class they have the home as. Okay, then you want to maybe look at some other comparables, like you can request your comparables. They're going to send you a sales comparison grid. That's going to have the other homes that they're comparing. You can also request the property cards for those homes to see, okay, you're saying you're comparing me to this house, now let me check the classifications to see if in fact they are the same class home. An equity approach would be the same thing. Another, let's say your neighbor across the street, you and him have very similar houses, except yours is valued for way more. You want to request his property card as well to see what the difference is in the appraisal. Maybe his home's older than you anticipated, or maybe they have it classed differently. Those are all questions that you want to ask these folks to basically hold their feet to the fire, because a lot of times there's a lot of not uniformity, because sometimes the same appraiser can't appraise the whole neighborhood. It may be two appraisers, and they may be on different wavelengths of thinking of classification, because at the end of the day, appraisal is only opinion of value, and what Kacey thinks a class 8 is, I may think it's a class 10. That's just some stuff you deal with, and then, the appraisal district may have a newer appraiser, appraising your area that may not be as familiar with it. Things like that can happen. So these are all the things you want to check for. I always say request your detailed property appraisal card, and that's going to have way more information than just your value. It's going to have a breakdown of all your classifications, what structures are on your home, the price per square foot, the percent good, and if there's any other adjustments. There's, like I mentioned, there's an economic factor adjustment. Let's say you have a 4,000 square foot house that only has 2 bathrooms. That's an economic deficiency. Typically, homes that are of that size have more than 2 bathrooms. So things like that. You want to make sure that you're classified as what is in line with their criteria. Each appraisal district has a different criteria. So you want to ask, okay, if my house is class this, provide me the documentation of the classes and how you arrive at those. All this is public information. They can't refuse to tell you how they're classifying these properties. I know whenever I went into one of these appraisal districts here a few weeks ago, they were trying to tell me that I couldn't get this information, or we don't do that. And unfortunately, I know that they can't do that. So the answer changed very quickly. But if you go in there and they try to tell you you can't get some of that information, or this is confidential, nothing is confidential. Not from the appraisal district. Even if you wanted to request what they've been browsing on their computer, you can do that because you pay for that. You pay for that. It's all taxpayer money. Everything in that office is public information. There are some caveats to confidentiality as far as ownership based off certain folks' line of work, police officers, things like that. they may have a confidentiality clause based off of their ownership and who they are, but not their property. It's still open to, if you have a county judge, you can request their property and get their information just like anybody else's. Everybody should be treated fair and equally.
So thank you, Daniel. We had a couple questions come in, and this actually is a great segue to our next point. So Jennifer asked, do you go through the inform? So you fill out your protest. Now you can go to the board, right? Or you can go to, or is it the board first, or, or the informal process?
You want to go to informal. So obviously the biggest thing you want to do is fill out your protest. Even before you do anything, you just want to make sure you beat that deadline. So get your protest in there. Then you can go in and do your informal. This, you'll meet one-on-one with an appraiser.
And it's usually over the phone now, right?
Online too.
Or it's,
You can do it online, on the phone. I like to be in person.
yeah. In person's always best, folks.
Yeah,
Face to face.
Yeah,
it's
if you have
always
the
best.
time, go down there. But the other thing you can do is present any evidence that you have to that appraiser one-on-one. Y'all can discuss it. A lot of times you can get a reduction from there. I know Brooklyn, I helped her last year, and she, basically, she watched our webinar. She used what we implemented. She asked a few questions, and she was very successful.
I was super successful. They can't hear me, but I was super successful online. I didn't even, if that helps people.
Yeah. So she said she did it online, and she had great success there.
I got 2 settlement offers,
Yeah.
so the communication.
Yeah, so they did communicate with her. They got her multiple offers. Obviously she didn't take the first one because it wasn't in line with what she thought. So she said, no, I'm still going to go to the board. And then they sent her a counter offer again. So
you were successful after.
Online, yeah.
Wow.
super
Okay.
successful.
We never got our premium check for that. We never got our royalties from that, so we'll have to collect on that. We'll have to collect on that later this year. Jennifer had a follow-up question. So it looks like the house is 20 years old and there is an increase of land only. Where are they getting their land value figure? What radius is typically used for comps? And then we'll get to your question, MC, after this.
So Jennifer, what it looks like they're doing is they are appraising whatever that land is in that neighborhood. So if you can geographically look at your neighborhood, every single property in that neighborhood is going to be coded with that neighborhood code. Again, this is going to be shown on that detailed property card. So if there are a few empty lots in that 20-year-old neighborhood and they sell for a premium, that's what they're going based off of. Because those are the only comps available in that neighborhood to show what the current land value is, because that's what the most recent purchase price for raw land was in that neighborhood. So basically they're going based off of that raw land sale, and that's where they're increasing just your land only, because they see now, oh, okay, instead of increasing everybody's homes, we're going to increase the land component, because here we have comps showing that people are buying land for $100,000 an acre versus $50,000 an acre like we had it for all these years. So they go based off of the most recent comps. The most accurate comp to land value in your neighborhood would be what raw land sells for in your neighborhood. So that's why they keep it that way into your neighborhood. If you go into another adjoining neighborhood, let's just say it's not as desirable as yours. I mean, it's just a market difference, you wouldn't pay for what you paid in your neighborhood from a subclass neighborhood. Maybe it's adjoining right next to yours, so it's not very equitable. That's what they also have to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And then I believe MC was the gentleman's name, or the individual's name. They asked, when should they request the information, such as the property card, the comps?
You can do that when you fill out your protest.
So
I always do it.
right
Yeah,
away.
I always do it. You can. I think there's a section in there on most forms that you can write something. That's where you can request it, or type up something and staple it to your protest and say, I request that I receive all information that y'all use to calculate my value and any comparables used, and I want the detailed property card, all that stuff, or whatever else you want to request. Do it while you protest.
And legally, how long do they have to supply that information?
So it's open record request is 10 days.
10 days in the state of Texas.
So the caveat
10 business days or 10 total days?
10 business days.
Okay,
And
so
the
2 weeks.
And the caveat to that is they can also say, we're super busy, we can't get it to you in 10 days. We'll get it to you when we get it to you. So it's not saying that, oh, they're on the clock and you have to get a response within 10 days,
Oh,
not necessarily your information.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about it reasonably, there's probably thousands of people that are requesting information. They may not be able to get to it in 10 days.
So this emphasizes the importance of staying on top of checking your mail, where your mailing address is, so when you get that notification, because if you don't respond until you have 1 week left to go to file your protest, and then they're going to take 2 weeks to get that information, well, I suppose that could still come in afterwards, but it's just best to be on top of it. Mm-hmm. So we have another question from Siu, I believe is how you pronounce it. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Is it true that if I get a reduction in the informal meeting, I should not go to the board because they might take it away? That's a good question.
Hey, funny question, matter of fact. So, whenever I was in charge of the appraisal districts, if I told the appraisers, if you make an informal offer to them, put that in the notes, so when they go to the board, at least they have that offer. That's not how all the appraisal districts view it, though. Again, Kacey mentioned, it's up to the chief appraiser's discretion. And if it's anything like from what we've experienced in the counties we work in, that's probably accurate. So it's worth a task. If they're telling you that, I would basically take their word for it, because they can do that. Unfortunately, I don't think it's very ethical, but it's just another way to get you to sign off, because then they'll say, okay, well, we'll put it back at market value, and you can go to the board and fight for whatever you want, and then you may not get it adjusted. I'll guarantee that's probably the verbiage they told you, something along the lines. I just don't like that. I don't think it's ethical, but it doesn't matter what I think.
Yeah, it's up to their discretion. That's a great question, and I think the answer to that question is, Sue, if you feel it's a fair offer, I would recommend taking it, but that's my personal recommendation. Again, we're not financial advisors or CPAs or attorneys, but if you feel it's a fair offer, why waste your time going back in to go through the formal process of getting in front of the board? But if you think it's unfair, then absolutely stand up for yourself. So Daniel, you go through the informal process, you're not happy.
Yep, you're not happy.
What's next?
So then you're going to be set up for a formal appraisal review board meeting. So you're going to have to appear, I believe in Hayes County last year, I think it was about 7 people that we sat in front of on the board.
Yeah, and they were all real friendly.
Yeah, very friendly, smiles and everything. But what they're going to do is they're going to review the information you presented. So basically, I always suggest go to the informal, because you're already going to know how the appraisal district's going to present their case. They're not going to hide anything. There's no new information, or at least they shouldn't be. If they're being ethical, there shouldn't be, oh, by the way, we didn't discuss this in your informal hearing, but here's this. I don't think that I would do that. It has to be ethical, but that way your informal kind of prepares you for what they're going to come at you with, and then you can go home and build your evidence to have a strong case to counteract what they're saying or what was told to you in the informal, and then you go in and you present your evidence. And the board's going to ultimately make a decision. They're going to weigh both sides of evidence, and they're going to make a decision whether they go with each or they'll come up with their own value, which technically they're not supposed to, but they do. And I just know that because I know that.
Take his word for it, folks. He has more knowledge about this than most people that we talk to. So we just had a question come in from Brian, I believe, and he said, "How much?" This is a great question, Brian. How much can property home values go up per year?
So
and then we'll answer this with land as well,
Yep.
because even if you have agriculture exemption on your property for land, you can't have ag exemption on a home site. But even if you have ag exemption on land, I believe you should still protest your property values, because what if you ever go to sell it and you have to pay rollback taxes? That's a personal opinion, but anyways, let's talk about home values specifically.
Yes. So home values and land values and values in general, any values. So the only way that you can protect yourself of having a max is having a homestead exemption. Other than that, it's reflective of what the market is.
So there is no law that says they can't. I mean, we've literally, folks, we've seen property values go up over 100% in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. It's insanity. But if the market got that hot, or if it was previously underpriced, or undervalued rather.
So the other thing is with your homestead exemption, I want to make this clear, because there's a lot of difference of opinion that I've heard just talking to folks earlier last week. So the homestead exemption doesn't mean that there's only a cap at 10%, and if it raises more than 10%, that's illegal. And no, they have every right to raise it more than 10%. The homestead only protects you from paying a 10% increase in taxable value in 1 year. So I'll use the example. Let's say they raise your property 50% in 1 year. You're only going to, and this is just hypothetically that the next 5 years it doesn't change. We all know that that's not going to be true, but just for example purposes. So your property value goes up 50% in 1 year. You're going to be liable that year for the 10% increase. But what they do with the other 40% is put it in what's called a homestead cap to be distributed over the next 4 years. 50%, that's up 10% each year. So that's what they do. The next year it's going to go up to 10%, the next year 10%, the next year 10%. Finally, on the 5th year, they go up that last 10%, and then you are now at full market value, where they protected you from going up more than 10% in 1 year. So that's the caveat to that. Your value could go up 200%, 100%, whatever it is, but your taxable liability is only going to go up 10% for that year on your homesteaded property. If you don't have a homestead, it's open to any value. Land, raw land, you don't qualify for anything other than your ag exemption. It's going up in whatever the amount they say. So.
Yeah, so it's important to protest your property tax and just be knowledgeable about this. So it looks like, and a great question, Brian. Now, before we switch over to Marla's question, so I believe Governor Abbott has put something in place specifically for homesteads.
For
Not
homestead.
for land, not for commercial property, but
Yes, so the homestead was at a $25,000 value, and this last year they had raised it to $40,000. So if you look at your taxable value on your exemptions, there should be an amount that says $40,000. Each entity is basically elected to put whatever they want on there, but I know through the county it's mandated to $40,000 this year.
okay. Which is, I mean, that's a significant increase. That's a big help. I mean, property tax relief is really helpful for residential, of course, land and commercial. That doesn't impact it. And you know, property taxes in Texas is such a beautiful place to live, and we're all so grateful to live in the great state of Texas. No state income tax, that helps a lot. They make up for it in property taxes. We have one of the highest property tax rates in the country, so it's big business in Texas, and of course the appraisal districts are going to do everything they can to raise these funds for schools and infrastructure projects, etc. So Marla just came in with a good question. So she's asking, do you have to have all of your protest info, photos, comps, etc. ready by the date of the informal review or by May 15th? Great question, Marla.
So you want to get your protest in there because obviously if you go to the formal process and they're going to set up a board meeting, it's probably going to be way later than May 15th. I think ours were in like.
Oh my goodness, it was
August or
almost,
something?
yeah, it was almost towards the end of the year.
Yeah, it was quite a difference, right? But if you want to go in it, so obviously get your protests in, like we can't stress that enough. Get that in there so you're not excluded from being able to protest. If you go in to talk informally, I would recommend you have all the information that you want to present to the appraiser, because chances are if it's good enough and you present to them good evidence showing that there's room for a reduction and they make that reduction, you may not have to go to the formal hearing. You can sign and agree to whatever offer that they lowered there if you think it's fair, and you won't have to go to the next step. So.
Okay. Yeah. Good question, Marla. So Daniel, you go through the informal process. You're not happy. You go to the board. You're still not happy. Do you have any remedies at that point?
Yes.
What can you do? Is there a last ditch effort of something you can do?
So if you feel that you're still, unjustly appraised and you really want to go to the next step, you can go through arbitration or county court. Both of those, you'd have to check with your local appraisal district to what the fees are, but there is money out of pocket. I believe the last time it was like $500, but that may change yearly. This has been a couple of years since I've been in that business, but yes, there is another level. That would be the last ditch effort to go through arbitration or through local county court. Yeah, county court, and then they'll make a determination there, and if you win there, then they'll have to cover your costs and adjust your value.
Now, I've heard of really high-profile property owners actually suing the county or the appraisal board. Or is that after, if let's say they go to arbitration, they're still not happy? I mean, is there? So obviously, this probably isn't applicable for most. Like, we would probably never pursue that because you have to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze?
It varies. I mean, as long as you get you went to your ARB hearing and they send you this letter, board of determining order. That's what allows you to then file your legal avenues.
Okay.
Either through arbitration, through county court, or to just outright sue them.
Okay. And ARB is Appraisal Review Board.
Yes.
Right. Okay. We just had another question come in. Where is the best place besides the county clerk records to find comparable sales in our non-disclosure state? Are Zillow values any good? Are the realtors report regarding the market any good? So
they're really gonna want to say confirmed sales, confirmed MLS sales is gonna hold the most weight. Unfortunately, you're gonna have to get with a real estate agent, if you know one, or if one's willing to help. That's gonna be your go-to, because they want to see what is actually sold, confirmed. Zillow, I know sometimes it shows sales and stuff, but that's not very reliable. That's not something that the state uses either. They don't check Zillow. What they want to see is confirmed MLS sales, or any other major listing service that may like.
Craigslist.
Yeah,
I mean,
Craigslist.
yeah. If you have a commercial property,
Yeah.
I mean, Craigslist is a really popular commercial listing
Some-
platform, and LoopNet sometimes, CoStar data in the commercial world. But okay, Ewan, did you have any follow-up questions from the process of what you're going through as a new landowner, new homeowner? Do you have any questions that might benefit the audience here?
I'm pretty good. I was curious about the retroactive though. How do they account for that? Do you get a check in the mail, or does that?
Yes, yeah. So once they determined that you were there, you were the owner, you lived in that residence prior, and I'm just speaking on your homestead right now, but that's the most common. You go back. What they'll do is they'll make it retroactive, they put it there, and then they'll send you a refund check in the mail for the difference.
Interesting.
And also too, if you do that and go through your homestead and do it retroactively, you need to also, if you have your property in escrow, let them know that you've applied for this, because that'll change your numbers as well. So
That's great. Yeah,
another tip on, and that's outside the appraisal district. Get with your escrow company.
yeah, that's great information.
Your escrow company is typically going to check your value sometime in October. So I say that to say, if you go and you get a board determined order saying that or settlement waiver saying this is going to be your new value, get that to your escrow company as soon as possible so they can distribute the change, throughout the rest of the years. Because if they start in October and you had a big increase, your last 3 months of that year for your escrow payment is probably going to be sky high. Like it happened to me when I first got my new house, and I was looking at it, and they annexed me into the city limits on that year, and that I didn't really think about it or didn't catch it in time. And I realized, oh man, my last few months of escrow they went up $400, per each month to make up the difference in the taxes for the city. So just be aware of that as well. That's kind of the timeline that they usually request that information from the appraisal districts.
Thank you for that. Daniel, speak real quickly. We just had Alan come in with a question, and we'll get to your question here shortly, Alan, but can you speak to porting real quick? Because we were working with TJ and Gwen. And so speak to that. Don't go into details because it's more of a complex area of the law, but talk about that real quick, just a 30,000 foot view.
Yeah, so real quick, just for example, if you are turning 65 and you live in a house that it could be, mobile home, or maybe an older house that family house y'all grew up in, and it's, old, and you decide, okay, well, I want to sell and get to a newer house that may be valued more. If you establish your ceiling on your over 65, you can actually port the amount from that house to the new house. So if you move from a $100,000 house to a $600,000 house, you can effectively move that with the same amount of taxes. There's a lot more to go into that. If you want to know, get with your appraisal district. You can ask them about it, but they will most of the time up front tell you, oh, you can do this. Very rare. So that's another piece of information that you can use if you're older and you decide to sell your home where you've established a ceiling. And I caveat that to say establish the ceiling, meaning you turn 65 and you've lived in that property for 2 years afterwards. Because if you don't establish the ceiling, there's nothing concrete to port. They'll just start establishing on the new house. So keep that in mind.
Technically, you have to be 67 then.
Yes,
at that point,
or
right?
67, or remember to have it on there, because you can only go retroactively. So if they go back and put it back, they have to establish the ceiling. Just make sure that's done. Okay. If that's something you're looking into.
Yeah. So and I mean, think about the tax savings, folks. Right? I mean, let's say perfect example. You living in a manufactured home for $200,000 of value. You established your ceiling, and then you port that value to a new $1 million home. Technically, you're only paying. Well, not technically, but actually, I mean, you're paying taxes on that $200,000 value. Now, every appraisal district won't necessarily honor this.
Yeah.
So
different counties view it differently. So
yes.
You definitely, again, check if you're going to stay in the same county. Check that county. If you're going to move to a different county, get with both of them and see what their processes are. Because again, tax goes up to interpretation to the chief appraiser. So
yeah, absolutely. And of course, just like the IRS, for example. They're going to slap your wrist if you didn't pay them enough, but they're not going to raise their hand and say, hey, you actually paid us too much, right? That's not necessarily their, I think it would be the right thing to do, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it. Same thing with the appraisal district. So they're not going to tell you about porting. They're not going to tell you about requesting your property card. This is why it's so important to educate yourself, right? This was just for educational purposes today, but talk to as many people as you can. We have a policy in-house that we talk to 5 different companies when we're getting any type of quotes or looking to work with someone. So you'll be amazed at the discrepancies when you talk to a few different people. So we had a question come in. Will you scroll up a little bit? It was from Alan. Do you mind scrolling up? There we go. So, go down. It was Alan, maybe right there. So Alan says, have you seen success at the county court? Does the jury of 6, since it is civil, have any better outcome versus a judge?
To be completely honest with you, in 10 years, Alan, I've never seen anybody go to county court.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, because at that time, if you really think about it, if you're that gung-ho about going to county court, I'm going to take a serious look at your property, because on the appraisal district side, okay, if this guy's this upset about the value of going to county court, are we missing something? Let me really get into this. Chances are I already even offer, hey, I see this is going on, I see your discrepancy with our value, I'd go out and personally go see your property if you have me out there to discuss whatever the discrepancy is. But typically, whenever it gets to that point, it's usually a serious issue that either got overlooked somewhere in the process. Maybe there's some way to work together to get through it. But like I said, I haven't really seen anybody go to county court. So
Yeah,
it's
good.
interesting. Arbitration I've seen, and arbitration, you know, it's just best information you have. You know, you sit in front of your arbitrator and you present your information, we present ours, or the appraisal district presents theirs, and the determination is made from the arbitrator. So I've seen those before, and that's, you know, it's just based off your information.
Yeah, good question though, Alan. We scroll down, Daniel. We have one last question. So let's see. Sue says, "Does this all the way down? Can this Weber after?" So they're asking if the webinar can be accessed after it, and some neighbors in my community might benefit from it. Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to shoot us an email, we'll send you the recording of this. So the email again is landteam@landsaletx.com. Sale is spelled S-A-L-E, not S-E-L-L. That's landteam@landsaletx.com. Yeah, feel free to, and if you have any further questions, we've discussed everything we wanted to talk about. So I know we went a little over on time, had some technical difficulties in the beginning. So appreciate everyone's patience, but yeah, feel free to shoot us an email, and in Brooklyn we can send that to them. And
Yeah, y'all got follow-up questions that are pertinent to your exact property. You know, shoot it to us, and I'll be more than happy to try to answer that for you if I can. I try to have a good answer for you, and if not, I'll let you know. At least go in this direction to try to find it. So.
yeah, and it's like we mentioned earlier, you know, we're fellow landowners and property owners ourselves. We're out there just in the same boat as you know, protesting our property taxes and standing up for our legal rights. And Brooklyn just put in the chat notes our email. So if you guys want to shoot us an email, again, happy to send you the recording of this, and if you have any questions. And we also have our website. We have videos that we do every other week, and it is a goldmine of information. It's free information. It has anything and everything to do with land, property rights, navigating easements, navigating eminent domain. We talk about some complex topics, and we talk about some more generic topics. So it's, you know, for all education levels, experience levels, if you will. And we're just here to help folks. You know, like I said, we specialize in buying and selling land and land brokerage and property brokerage. But we have people that reach out to us all the time and just ask us questions. And we always respond to people. We never leave anyone hanging. And so there are times where people have asked us questions and we don't get paid to help them, but we just still help them because it's the right thing to do, because sometimes it is very overwhelming to navigate all of this. So yeah, Brooklyn just posted our website as well, and you guys can't see Brooklyn. She's the mastermind behind the scenes, so thank you, Brooklyn, for helping us. And it was just exciting to do this webinar. This is by far our most popular webinar every year. We will do this every single year because it is such an important topic, and again, it's the single largest financial decision you can make. So we encourage you to educate yourself as much as possible and just make sure that you're standing up for your rights. So appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ewan. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
So this
Thank
is
you
always
for your
fun to
time.
do this and help people. So really appreciate everyone. And again, feel free to reach out to us if there's anything we can ever do for you and your family. Thanks, y'all.
Have a good one.